May 5th, 2019. Kyoto still held a trace of spring's chill when the first news of the expedition came crackling through my small apartment. They had returned. After weeks of absolute silence, those mud-caked, sweat-streaked figures stepped down from the transport plane as if they had just come back from another world. And indeed, they brought with them something that didn't belong here at all, a species of insect never before recorded, found deep within an African rainforest, so remote that even modern maps left it blank. In my work log, I noted it like any important finding, but inside a quiet flame flickered. Finally, something worth working on. Not ticks, not mosquitoes. Something entirely new. In recent months, the Yushio Research Center had felt like it was collecting dust. Reports were filled with small, unimpressive projects, none strong enough to secure funding. Management whispered about staff cuts. Every day I walked into the lab to see the tired faces of my colleagues under the harsh fluorescent light's eyes of people pretending to be busy. The only thing moving was the wall clock, silently counting down to the day we might be shut down. My mother called for the third time that week. Her voice was the same blend of worry and the need for conversation. Since my father's death, she had clung to these calls, and I, drowning in work and debt, still tried to hide everything from her. I spoke about the weather, my morning coffee, trivial little things, because I didn't want her to hear the creeping boredom in my tone. But today was different. Today I had a real story to tell, even if I couldn't share all of it yet. The expedition had brought back something that could change the fate of the center. And I, Suri Janichi, head entomologist, would be among the first to examine this mystery. Of course, this wasn't just another research specimen. The African rainforest, like a treasure chest still locked, holds creatures that science has yet to name. Life there refuses to bend to human boundaries. Everything grows, crawls, flies, and breeds according to ancient rules we can only guess at. That's why each time someone steps out of that place with a discovery, it's not merely science, it's a fragment of a world still untamed. I wondered, what would this creature be like? Would it be small and elusive like most insects, or would it have some bizarre form that forces you to look twice? Could it save our dwindling budget, perhaps even my faltering career? That evening, under the warm cone of my desk lamp, I studied the blurry photographs the expedition had sent before returning, shapes indistinct, just a shadow of greenish blue winding between wet leaves and rotting trunks. That dim light, it didn't seem reflected from equipment. It looked as though it came from the insect itself. A mingling of excitement and unease stirred in me. I knew well that every great discovery came with a price. But that night I didn't care what the price was. I thought only of the smell of damp earth, the murmur of hidden life in the jungle, and the image of a creature unknown to humankind waiting for me behind the laboratory door. May 9th, 2019. It arrived under a shroud of protocols and hushed voices, delivered in the dead of night as if secrecy could somehow keep it safer. The insect was placed inside a specially designed enclosure, climate and light calibrated to mimic its native habitat. A glass tank the size of my office, complete with soil from the African site plants chosen to match its feeding patterns, and humidity levels so exact they made the air bead with warm condensation. I stood outside the chamber, staring at the fogged glass, feeling a childish urge to press my face to it. But Kimura, the lead researcher on this stage of the study, was already deep in his initial observations. For now, the creature was off limits, its world closed to me by a simple key, and Kimura's unwavering caution. I had to be patient. Science demands it. Still, the thought gnawed at me. Why so much space for one insect? Why such elaborate care when half the species we collect are kept in plastic boxes no larger than a shoebox? What made this one so special that it deserved an entire self-contained ecosystem? The day should have ended there, but trouble arrived in a different form. Manina, one of our field researchers, had handed in his resignation without warning. His note was short and unhelpful. He simply couldn't work with the others anymore. A strange claim considering the tight camaraderie our field teams usually shared after an expedition. I suspected cabin fever or perhaps a clash born from the stress of weeks in the wild. Still, losing him now would be a blow we couldn't afford. I offered him a week of medical leave, hoping the time away might clear his mind. His skin was blotched with the angry red rashes we sometimes saw after exposure to certain jungle plants, and I could tell he was more worn down than he cared to admit. Later that evening, Tara called to set a dinner date. She's been a constant in my life, both a friend and a curious observer of my work. After a day of sealed doors and unanswered questions, the thought of her smile and a glass of good wine felt like relief. But as I left the lab, my eyes strayed one last time to the massive enclosure. The condensation swirled in slow spirals inside like breath in cold air. Somewhere within the insect was moving unseen, and though I couldn't say why, I had the distinct impression it already knew I was watching. May 10th, 11th, 2019. Manina's voice on the phone was surprisingly light when he called the next morning, so light it felt forced. He apologized profusely, practically begging me to tear up his resignation letter. I agreed, shredding it while he was still on the line. I told him he could finish out his paid leave, but he insisted on coming back right away. I wanted to believe him, wanted to think this sudden turn meant things were truly improving. But less than 24 hours later, everything broke. He arrived at the research center on May 11th as if nothing were wrong, calm, even polite. There was no hint of the storm that would follow. Without warning, he crossed the lab floor to the field research section and attacked Maurice, one of his closest friends. It was brutal and fast hands at Maurice's throat, eyes wide and unrecognizing. If Cade hadn't been there to pull him off and call security, we might have been dealing with a body instead of an injury. We were left stunned, questions ricocheting off the walls. Why there was no history of violence, no festering grudge we knew of. Just two colleagues who had once shared a tent in the middle of the jungle, laughing over shared rations. Now Maurice lay in the infirmary with livid marks on his neck, and the rest of the field team was either injured or too shaken to work. Manina was removed from the premises under guard. His eyes had a distant glaze as he was led away, muttering things none of us could understand. That night I couldn't sleep. I replayed every word he'd said to me just the day before, searching for some clue I'd missed. His voice had been steady, his tone almost grateful. How could I not have heard it? The fracture in his mind, the violence waiting just beneath. In the dim hours before dawn, I caught myself wondering if something from the expedition had come back with him, not just memories or injuries, but something invisible. The rainforest changes people, I've seen it. Weeks of damp, the drone of unseen creatures, the sense that the air itself is watching you. It seeps into your thoughts, reshapes them. I told myself it was exhaustion making me think like that, but deep down I knew I'd be watching everyone from the expedition much more closely from now on. May 13th, 2019. The hospital room smelled faintly of antiseptic and wilted flowers. Maurice's family clustered near his bed, their faces etched with worry but softened by relief. He was stable, his breathing steady under the plastic curve of an oxygen mask. I told them how sorry I was for what had happened, that we would support them in any way we could. Some nodded with kindness, even tried to comfort me. Others, though, looked at me with a quiet accusation, as if I'd failed to protect him. The trial for Menina moved faster than I expected. Security footage and witness statements left little to dispute. The police described him as incoherent and inconsistent, completely unhinged. Still, he insisted on his innocence with a stubbornness that made it seem like he was clinging to a different version of reality, one only he could see. Back at the lab, there was finally movement on the one thing that had kept me tethered through all of this: Kimura's initial report on the specimen. His excitement was palpable, though delivered in his usual measured tone. The insect, he said, was likely a distant cousin of the bombardier beetle, only larger, its colors more striking, a deep navy blue with thin green stripes along the length of its wing covers. Like its cousin, it had a defensive spray, but Kimura wasn't sure yet what it contained. Early tests suggested it wasn't lethal, perhaps just enough to irritate the eyes or leave an unpleasant taste for predators. Still, the analysis was ongoing. The way he described it, I could almost see it, its colors catching the light, a tiny jewel of the jungle. I sat at my desk later that evening holding my mother's most recent letter. Inside was a check. I didn't want to cash it, she needed it more than I did. But debt doesn't wait for pride, and the truth was that my savings were thinning like worn paper. I told myself I'd pay her back once this discovery proved its worth. And I believed it would. Something about this insect felt different. Not just new, significant. The kind of thing that could shift the weight of an entire research center's future. May 16th, 2019. The verdict came down with a weight that didn't feel nearly heavy enough. Guilty attempted murder. 10 years in prison with the possibility of early release. I wanted to believe in the fairness of our courts, but the sentence felt like a polite nod to justice rather than its true execution. The explanation was predictable: diminished capacity, mental instability, a mind unfit to bear the full punishment. Easy words that ignored the bruises still dark on Maurice's neck and the fear that lingered in the lab like a chemical scent. I pushed the frustration aside when Kimura summoned me to the containment chamber. He was ready to share more about the beetle. The defensive spray it had been releasing for days, painting mottled red stains across its environment, was thankfully harmless to humans. At worst, it could cause mild eye irritation. Goggles would be enough protection. That small reassurance was all I needed to hear. For days, I'd been imagining its world from the outside, picturing it only through blurred photographs and Kimura's clipped descriptions. Now the door was finally opening. Inside, the air was thick with humidity, clinging to my skin in a way that made every breath feel heavier. The tank was vast, its ceiling stretching high enough for small trees to grow in shallow soil. Somewhere in that microcosm, the beetle was moving just beyond sight. Even without seeing it yet, I could feel my pulse quicken. The size of the enclosure suddenly made sense. This wasn't just an insect to be pinned under glass or sealed in a jar. It was something meant to be observed in motion in an environment that let it reveal itself. I thought of the expedition again, of the hands that had reached into a world untouched and returned with this tiny living piece of it. And now at last I was about to step inside. May 17, 2019. The moment I stepped into the enclosure, the world outside seemed to vanish, sealed off by the heavy glass walls and the warm, damp air that clung like a second skin. The light inside was dim and filtered the way it must be under a jungle canopy. I could hear the faint rustle of leaves, though no breeze touched them. Somewhere in that miniature forest it was waiting. Then I saw it. It was slightly larger than I'd expected, about 4 centimeters from head to wingtip, but its presence seemed far bigger. The shell gleamed with a deep navy so rich it almost drank the light, bisected by vivid green stripes that shimmered when it moved. Every shift of its body caught my eye like the flicker of a gemstone. But it wasn't the sight that stunned me. It was the smell. The air around it carried a sweetness so thick and intoxicating I felt it in the back of my throat. Not cloying, not overpowering, just perfectly balanced, like the moment before ripe fruit bursts in your hand. There were floral tones layered with something richer, a warmth that made me want to breathe deeper, to hold it inside me. I moved slowly, careful not to startle it. It watched me with the stillness of something that knows it doesn't need to run. My boots sank slightly into the damp soil, and as I drew closer to where the scent was strongest, I realized it was coming from a small hollow the beetle had chosen as its nest. Kimura had insisted I wear a mask, but I kept it loose, letting the scent flood in. Part of me imagined bottling it, sealing it away like treasure. Perfume, I thought. This could be more than science. This could be an industry, a salvation for the center's dwindling funds. The beetle shifted, and the air seemed to thrum with its presence. For a long moment, I simply stood there, breathing it in, until the thought of the outside world felt hazy and unimportant. When I finally stepped back toward the door, the smell clung to my hair, my clothes, my skin, as if the beetle had marked me somehow. May 18, 2019. The city lights felt almost too sharp after the jungle dimness of the enclosure. Tara had chosen the place, a narrow little bar tucked between 2 buildings so old their wooden facades looked like they'd been standing since Kyoto's first street lamps were lit. Inside, the air was warm with the smell of grilled food and citrusy cocktails, the kind of scent that mingles with laughter and the low hum of music. We danced. We drank. For a while it felt easy, like the weight of the past weeks had been left at the lab door. Tara still had that effortless way of finding joy, pulling it into the room as though she'd been carrying it in her pocket all along. I didn't tell her about the beetle yet, but the thought pressed at me every time I caught a faint trace of its scent still clinging to my hair. Then he appeared. A stranger, tall and out of place among the regulars, eyes fixed on me like he was trying to remember a name he'd once known. He asked to dance, and I said yes before I thought about why. His rhythm was clumsy, but his attention was complete, an odd mix of flattery and something else I couldn't quite name. I saw Tara watching us. Not glaring, not openly hostile, but with a gaze that flicked between curiosity and something sharper. A recognition, perhaps, as though she knew him from somewhere I didn't. Even after we left, her questions were clipped, her smile strained. I let it go. I didn't want another night soured by unspoken tension. But walking home, I found myself touching my hair, breathing in the faint sweetness that lingered there. The scent was a secret, and secrets have a way of making you feel untouchable. May 19th, 2019, I couldn't stay away from the enclosure. The lab was quiet that morning, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like the air itself is listening. And I found myself drawn back to that warm, perfumed world. The scent seemed even richer now, filling my lungs with each slow breath until my thoughts softened around the edges. I stayed in there longer than I should have, moving slowly, letting the Beetle's presence wrap around me like a silken net. Kimura had stopped insisting on masks. He was convinced the spray was harmless. And maybe it was. I didn't feel sick. On the contrary, I felt lighter, almost euphoric. The hours slipped past without my noticing. It wasn't until later over lunch at my desk that the news came through. Menina was dead. The report was thin on details, an unspecified, debilitating illness in prison. I didn't believe it for a second. Illness was too neat a word for someone like him. My guess was he'd provoked the wrong inmate and paid the price. It was brutal, maybe even deserved, but I couldn't shake the image of him as he'd been before, calm, ordinary, laughing beside Maurice in the field. How quickly people change. Or perhaps they don't change at all, they just let something else show through. And then there was the man from the bar. I knew I'd given him my number. I remembered the feel of his palm against mine, the way his attention never wavered. Yet my phone stayed silent. No call, no text. Maybe he wasn't interested after all, but that didn't sit right. People don't look at you like that and then disappear. Meanwhile, my mother had called more than a dozen times this week. I'd stopped answering. I told myself it was because I needed space, but the truth was I didn't want anyone breaking the strange spell I was under. This scent, this secret, it was mine, and I wasn't ready to share it with anyone, not even Tara. May 21st, 2019. By morning, the idea had sharpened into something tangible. The Beetle's fragrance wasn't just a scientific curiosity, it was a commodity. I called Tara, my voice buoyed by a conviction I hadn't felt in months, and told her everything. She hesitated at first, and I couldn't blame her. Turning an insect's chemical defense into something people would wear on their skin was unconventional, to put it gently. But persistence is a language I speak fluently. I reminded her of the market potential of the luxury fragrance houses, always searching for a signature note no one else could replicate. Eventually, curiosity won. She agreed to come in and smell it for herself before dismissing the idea. Kimura, on the other hand, didn't need convincing. We were both in the same leaky financial boat, and he knew as well as I did how rare this opportunity was. He'd already started hypothesizing about the purpose of the scent. His theory surprised me. Perhaps it wasn't meant to deter predators at all, but to guide the Beetle's young toward food. If the adults fed on fruit and flowers, the fragrance could mimic those scents, ensuring hatchlings learned what to seek out. It made sense in a way that almost felt poetic. The Beetle's sweetness wasn't a warning, it was an invitation, a promise of sustenance. Something about that thought sat warm in my chest. I found myself picturing Tara in the enclosure, her designer's eyes scanning the lush miniature jungle, her mind already working through product lines, perfume, shampoos, even scented lotions. This could be the bridge between our worlds, hers of beauty and design, mine of science and preservation. And maybe, just maybe, it could be the thing that finally pulled us both out of the shadows we'd been living in. May 22nd, 2019. Tara arrived just after noon, dressed simply but with that quiet elegance she seemed to wear like a second skin. She looked skeptical as we walked down the hall toward the containment chamber, her arms folded, eyes scanning the sterile walls as though searching for some sign of what I'd been raving about. Inside the enclosure was still heavy with the Beetle's perfume. We'd laid out flowers and fruit that morning, hoping to encourage more activity, but by the time we stepped in, the offering sat untouched. The Beetle was somewhere deeper in its small jungle, hidden yet entirely present in the air around us. I watched Tara's expression change. At first, she inhaled cautiously as though expecting something sharp or chemical. Then her face softened, eyes widening, mouth parting just slightly. She turned in a slow circle, taking in the air as if tasting it with every breath. She began, then stopped, searching for the right word. "The best thing you've ever smelled," I offered. Her laugh was quick, surprised. Maybe she admitted, but I could already see the wheels turning behind her eyes. She spoke quickly after that: perfume, shampoos, scented body oils, even incense. She sketched out product lines in broad strokes, describing packaging ideas, marketing angles. Then the momentum faltered. Her brow furrowed when I told her the truth: we only had one Beetle. She asked if more could be collected, but I knew the answer. Cade and Marisi were in no state to return to the field, and the rest of the team was stretched thin. I had to tell her no. It was like watching a balloon deflate. She tried to hide her disappointment, but it hung in the air between us. She said replication might be possible, but only with months of testing. And until then, the only way to capture the scent would be from the Beetle itself. Kimura promised to explore other solutions, but as Tara left that day, I felt the weight of the problem settle on my shoulders. For all its beauty, the scent was as fragile as the life that made it. And in our line of work, nothing that fragile lasts forever. May 23rd, 2019, the call from Kimura came just after sunrise, his voice stripped of the careful calm he usually wore. "It's dead," he said, no preamble. I was at the lab within 20 minutes, my coffee cooling untouched on the passenger seat. The enclosure felt different the moment I stepped inside the observation area, quieter, heavier, as if the air itself understood the loss. The Beetle lay on its side near the base of a small tree. The iridescence of its shell dulled its delicate legs, curled inward like a fist. For a moment, I simply stood there, staring, unwilling to believe that something so singular could be gone so suddenly. Kimura was already working, gloves on, carefully lifting the body into a sterile container. His eyes avoided mine. He'd been running tests late into the night, searching for any sign of illness or injury, but nothing pointed to an obvious cause. It had eaten normally the day before, moved through the enclosure with the same slow grace as always. And now, this. We both knew what it meant. Without the Beetle, there was no scent, no product line, no rescue for the lab's sinking budget. Months, maybe years of potential gone in a heartbeat. I thought of Tara's face when she'd first stepped inside, the way her eyes had lit up. I thought of my own heartbeat quickening when the fragrance had first wrapped around me like warm silk. The idea that this was the last time I would smell it, truly smell it alive and unfiltered, was like a small grief of its own. Kimura promised to work through the night, analyzing every scrap of data, every drop of residue the Beetle had left behind. I told him he had my full faith, but as I walked out of the lab that evening, I couldn't shake the feeling that a door had quietly closed, and that on the other side something was still moving in the dark. May 24th, 2019. I was halfway to the field research wing when Kimura's call came through. His voice was tight, but this time there was something behind it, an edge of excitement I hadn't heard since the day the Beetle arrived. "It wasn't spray," he said. "The red on the trees, it's not residue, it's eggs." For a second I didn't understand. Then it hit me. The Beetle had been hermaphroditic, capable of reproducing without a mate. The markings we'd assumed were part of its defensive behavior were in fact the protective shell for hundreds, maybe thousands of tiny lives. Given the Beetle's age, Kimura estimated the eggs were days away from hatching. I stood in stunned silence, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like a swarm. In a matter of weeks, we could have a population large enough to supply any amount of fragrance we needed safely, sustainably. The lab could recover. My career could recover. Everything that had been slipping could be caught again. The vision unfolded in my mind's eye as Kimura spoke, glass cases filled with shimmering shells, the air heavy with that impossible sweetness, buyers lining up with checks in hand. It was a lifeline thrown into water I hadn't realized I was already sinking into. I told Kimura he'd saved us. He brushed it off, saying the credit belonged to the Beetle itself, but I didn't care about modesty right now. This was the kind of break you didn't get twice. I left the lab that day with a sense of purpose thrumming through me, the faint scent of the enclosure still clinging to my clothes. The Beetle was gone, yes, but its legacy was about to hatch. May 26th, 2019. The eggs had become the center of my days, my nights, my thoughts. Every hour I wasn't in the enclosure, I was thinking about it, imagining the shells, splitting the tiny red forms, crawling into the world with that same sweetness clinging to them like a blessing. But Tara didn't see it the same way. She came to the lab not to celebrate, but to warn me. Her voice was sharper than I'd ever heard it, the words tumbling out in a rush. "It was wrong to use them like this," she said. "We didn't understand the long-term risks. The Beetle wasn't just a resource, it was a living thing that had already shown it could change people." I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it. Change people. They were insects. The only change they could bring was economic, turning debt into profit, despair into survival. I told her so, but she wouldn't let it go. She even claimed the Beetle was dangerous. I knew then she'd lost sight of reality. Kate understood. She knew what was at stake for both our businesses. And when I mentioned it to Menina recently, back in circulation, a little quieter, a little more deliberate, he agreed without hesitation. He even joined me for a drink that night to toast the future. Still, when I looked at Tara across the room, the way she avoided meeting Menina's eyes, the way her smile froze, just before fading altogether, I felt a thread pulled taut between us. I told myself it was jealousy or maybe guilt. but a small voice in me wondered if she knew something I didn't. Not that it mattered. The eggs were hatching soon. Once the sweetness filled the air again, all doubts, hers, mine, anyone's, would dissolve. May 27th, 2019. They hatched in silence, but the moment felt deafening. The enclosure smelled richer than ever, thick, velvety, almost narcotic. At first, the movement was subtle, a ripple along the bark of the trees near the nesting site. Then the red appeared, tiny, glistening bodies no bigger than a grain of rice. Swarming together like a living velvet shroud, they covered the branches, the leaves, even the damp earth beneath. I stepped inside without hesitation. The air clung to my skin, heavy with heat and fragrance. I knelt near the nest, watching the hatchlings shift and weave their movements, forming hypnotic patterns. I must have stayed there for hours, lulled into stillness by the steady rhythm of their crawling. At some point, I lay back on the soft soil and let them move across my arms, my neck, my face. They tickled, delicate, harmless, almost affectionate. It was Tara who ruined it. She burst into the enclosure, shouting my name, her hands grabbing my shoulder with enough force to wrench me upright. Pain shot down my arm. I turned, confused, angry. Why would she pull me away from something so perfect? She was talking, her voice urgent, but the words blurred my mind, still tangled in the sweetness. Later, I told myself she was just stressed, that she needed time to see what I saw. A few months away from the lab might clear her head. Extended leave, yes, that was the best choice. From now on, Maurice would keep me updated. His cosmetics business depended on these beetles as much as mine did, and I trusted him to keep watch while I took a short rest. I barely noticed the redness blooming across my legs, the itch that followed me home. Probably just ivy from the walk back last night. Nothing serious. May 28th, 2019. Suri, my assistant, has been doing well in my absence. In fact, I told her she might be running the lab herself someday if she kept this up. She called to update me on the beetles they were eating. Not just the fruit and flowers Kimura had once hypothesized about, but the very wood of the enclosure itself. They were selective, choosing spots closer to the nest, boring small, perfect tunnels that seemed too precise for something so small. It fascinated me to think they could grow larger so late in life. There was a method to their feeding, a pattern that made me wonder if it was instinct or something more deliberate. My own condition, meanwhile, had shifted from nuisance to concern. The rash on my legs was fading, but in its place came a fever that soaked my sheets at night and a deep ache in my chest each time I tried to take a full breath. I told myself it was the flu, nothing more, though the thought of a doctor's office made my skin crawl for reasons I couldn't name. Through it all, Tara remained by my side. She'd taken time away from her own work to stay here, moving quietly around the apartment, bringing tea, adjusting blankets, sitting beside me when the coughing kept me from sleep. I thought of the nights in the enclosure, the beetles swarming like a warm tide around me, and for some reason the two memories began to blur. I told her I loved her once, between shivers. She didn't answer right away, just smoothed the hair back from my forehead. Her touch felt cooler than the air around us. June 2nd, 2019. Tara found me that night. She told the police later that she'd come to celebrate the launch of a new women's fragrance line that had been a success, and she wanted to bring champagne. But when she opened my door, the smell hit her before she even reached the living room. Not the warm sweetness of the beetles, but something metallic, damp, and wrong. I was in the bedroom. The lamp was still on, casting a yellow half-light over the bed. My skin had ruptured in places, large round perforations that oozed dark fluid. The sheets were spotted with it. My breathing had stopped hours earlier. The autopsy report was clinical in its horror. A parasitic infestation had spread through my body, feeding on my blood until my organs collapsed. They listed the official cause of death as internal exsanguination. The most unsettling detail, though, wasn't in the medical notes. It came from the recovery team at the lab. The beetles, those hatched from the single perfect parent, were gone. Every last one. Some claimed they'd been stolen. Others whispered that they'd simply found a way out. No one could say for certain where they'd gone, only that they were no longer here. The investigation was quick but unsatisfying. Tara, still pale from finding me, answered every question the police had, though her voice wavered when they pressed about the beetles. She told them what she knew, that the enclosure had been sealed, that only a handful of people had access, but by the time anyone looked inside, it was empty. Kimura insisted no one from the lab had taken them. He spoke with a kind of exhausted certainty, as if repeating it often enough might make it true. Yet he couldn't explain the absence of broken glass, the intact locks, the lack of any physical breach. It was as if the beetles had simply dissolved into the air. The press was relentless for a week. Sensational headlines spoke of murderous jungle insects and the scientist who died for her discovery. My name became a cautionary whisper in academic circles, a reminder of how quickly brilliance can collapse into tragedy. But what unsettled those who had been inside the enclosure was not my death, nor even the vanishing of the beetles. It was the lingering scent. Days after the habitat had been stripped bare, the air still carried a faint trace of that sweetness, fainter each day, but stubborn, clinging to the walls and the soil like a ghost refusing to leave. No one could say if the beetles were gone for good. And deep down, none of them really believed it. In the months that followed, the lab quietly shuttered the beetle project. Officially, the reason was resource reallocation. Unofficially, no one wanted to be the one to bring them back inside. The funding Tara and I had dreamed about evaporated. And the scent, the very thing that had made it all seem possible, became little more than a story told in hushed tones over drinks at scientific conferences. Yet outside the clean, climate-controlled walls of Yushio Research Center, stories began to circulate. Farmers in a small coastal town claimed that an unfamiliar perfume would drift through their fields at night, so sweet it made their eyes water. A dock worker swore he'd seen something shimmer green and blue beneath the wood of a shipping crate before it disappeared into the shadows. And a nurse at a rural clinic spoke of a patient with a rash unlike any she'd seen, tiny, perfect circles forming beneath the skin as if something was marking its way out. The beetles were out there. No containment, no control. If there was a lesson in all of this, it was not a simple one. Ambition is rarely evil on its own. It's the hunger beneath it, the part that tells you you're immune to the risks, that makes you believe you can hold beauty without being changed by it. We told ourselves the beetles were harmless. We told ourselves we were in control. But the jungle doesn't let go of what it sends into the world. And somewhere far from Kyoto, a sweetness rises on the wind, carrying with it the memory of green stripes and blue shells and the promise that some doors once opened can never be closed again.